disruptive audience members to please be quiet. If they do not and continue to be disruptive, she will ask them to leave. Third, failure to leave and continued disruption is a violation of the community standards, which states in the Freedom of Expression and Participation Clause that, quote, implicit in the pursuit of this exchange is the privilege to dissent and demonstrate in a peaceful and non-disruptive manner without unreasonable obstruction or hindrance. Fourth, and finally, there will be a question and answer session at the end of the speech. We will form a line on the left-hand side of the room, my left-hand side of the room. You may ask any question that you like, but we do ask that you keep it under a minute. This speech, the question is not an opportunity for you to present your monologue. So thank you for that. Now on to the speaker. He is the author of such internationally best-selling crime novels as True Crime, films by Clint Eastwood, Don't Say a Word, film starring Michael Douglas, and Empire of Lies. Stephen King called him the most original novelist of crime and suspense since Cornwell Woolrich. He has been nominated for the Mystery Writers of America's Edgar Award 5 times and has won the Smith Award and been nominated twice for the Boucherson's Anthony's. His books have been translated around the world. His most recent book is a memoir of his religious journey titled The Great Good Thing, A Secular Jew Comes to Faith in Christ. His most recent work of fiction is the serial fantasy thriller podcast, Another Kingdom, available on iTunes and other podcast venues. He is a contributing editor to the City Journal, the magazine of the Manhattan Institute, and has written numerous articles for them, including a report from an embed with American troops in Afghanistan, and a consideration of politics of William Wordsworth. In his essays and op-eds on politics, religion, movies, and literature have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, and elsewhere. He has also created popular satire video features called Klavan on the Culture for PJ TV and a serious commentary for Glenn Beck's Blaze TV, and The Revolting Truth for Truth Revolt. He currently does a Monday through Friday podcast for the Daily Wire called The Andrew Klavan Show. It is an honor and a privilege to welcome Mr. Andrew Klavan.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. And I do hope you'll stay for the question and answers, especially if you disagree with me. I'd like to hear from you. I always feel that it's only the people who want to control us who don't want us to disagree and talk to each other. If they can keep us angry at one another, they can work us and manipulate us and keep in power. And I always feel that when we actually talk to one another, things get better. We actually find out that we might not hate each other as much as we're supposed to. Speaking of which, I'm very thankful to Young America's Foundation for hosting me, and for the Young Americans for Freedom. But the Young America's Foundation, when they ask you to do a speech, I think they pass out a questionnaire to conservatives, and they ask them what they'd like to hear about, and then they send you a suggested title for your speech. You don't have to do it, but it's their suggestion. And the title they sent me was Culture Wars: Why Everything You Know About Western Civilization is Wrong. And I thought, geez, that's freaking belligerent, you know? It's like, these guys, they look nice, but that's very, it's like, culture wars, everything you know is wrong. And I thought, that's pretty much the state of our political discourse at this point. It's like we're just kind of constantly screaming at each other, never listening to each other. So it's war, and you're wrong. And so I'm going to be absolutely honest with you from where I stand as a conservative and where I see things. But I do want to hear from you. It is absolutely true that there are things that the left says that I don't understand at all. Like, I don't get it. I don't even know what they're talking about. So, just for instance, I hear left-wingers say things like, there's no internal difference between men and women. Men and women are exactly the same. And listen, that's not my experience of life. That's not what I've seen in my life. But you're young people. You can experiment with ideas, and maybe it'll work out for you, maybe it won't. And I don't mind that at all. But the same people who say that to me, the same people who say men and women are exactly the same, will tell me that a transgender person is a woman in a man's body. And I think, well, if they're the same, how would he know? How would you know you had a woman in your body if men and women are exactly the same? And I don't get what they're talking about. Another one, and I'll only do a couple because I don't mean to be controversial, I'm just telling you where I come from, is you should respect all cultures. I live in Hollywood. There's a big billboard up. I think it's a jeans ad. I don't know what it is. It's a jeans ad, I think, and it says, respect all cultures. And I think, really? Do I have to? Do I have to do that? I mean, in the South, in this country, before the Civil War, there was a culture that thought it was all right to hold human beings as slaves. Like, I don't respect that culture. And in Germany in the 40s, they carted people off and killed them by the trainload. I got no respect. What am I supposed to say about that? Like, well, Beethoven was good, but the carting people off to the gas chambers, but I respect your culture. I don't respect that culture. Yeah, Saudi Arabia today, great things are happening in Saudi Arabia. Wonderful things. This new crown prince is a great guy. I'm very excited about the stuff he's doing. But still, in Saudi Arabia, a woman can't leave her house without asking permission from her nearest male relative, even if it's her son. How would you like that? Little Tommy, may I go outside? I don't respect that culture. I think we all know that there are things that are right and things that are wrong. And you don't have to respect people when they're doing what's wrong. Now, on the conservative side, I will say this, because I will criticize my own team. And you'll have to forgive me. Years of typing have left me with a damaged hand, so don't worry if my hand trembles a little. On the conservative side, we have a tendency, I think, to see everything as the end of Western culture. Every change, every liberalization, everything that turns around, it's going to be, this is the end of Western culture. I had a guy, good friend of mine, not that long ago, said, we were sitting over dinner, and he said to me, if gay marriage becomes a reality, that's going to be the end of Western civilization. And I was like, because I thought it was going to be more like Cloverfield, where some giant monster came and killed us all. But no, for him, that's what it is. And I think conservatives do that a lot. So here's what I want to talk about, okay? I know your professors tell you this, and I know you hear it all the time. But if you think Western culture is about race, if you think it's about gender, if you think it's about sexuality, then everything you know about Western civilization actually is wrong. Because those are issues all around the world for everybody all the time. There's really only one thing that is unique about Western culture, and especially about American culture, the thing that defines us, as opposed to all the things that people do, which are people do terrible things to one another. But the idea that defines us is your happiness. Your happiness. I mean, this is in the Declaration. They talk about you have the God-given right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then it says something absolutely bizarre. It says, to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men. And the thing is, that was never true. Until the country you are in right this moment, no government on earth had ever been instituted to secure the right to the pursuit of happiness. I mean, you just think about it for a minute. Like in the first dynasty in Egypt, when the pharaoh died, they used to kill his servants, so he'd have servants in the afterlife. I mean, that to me does not sound like a government that was established to secure your happiness. It's like, come right this way, servants. We're going to secure your right to happiness. It never happened before, and there's a lot of debate. Where did Thomas Jefferson get this idea? Where did he get the idea of the pursuit of happiness as a right that government was supposed to protect? And some people say, well, it's in John Locke, the philosopher John Locke. But I just think they're missing the whole thing. The pursuit of happiness has been central to Western culture from the very, very beginning. So let me give you my 2-minute history of Western culture. In order to really understand Western culture, you have to understand that there are two men, I won't call them heroes, they're the telemons. Is there anybody here who knows what a telemon is? Nobody knows what a telemon is. All right. In architecture, there are pillars that hold things up, and if they're carved in the shape of a woman, they're called a caryatid. And if they're carved in the shape of a man, they're called a telemon, after a mythical figure who's one of the Argonauts. I work in the movie business a lot, and when you go in the Disney studio, they have a building that has telemons that are shaped like the Seven Dwarfs. So you have like grumpy, and it always struck me as kind of absurd, but also kind of wonderful. Classic American. The two telemons of Western civilization, the two men who hold up Western civilization at the very bottom, are Socrates and Jesus. A gay guy and a Jew. This is why, by the way, the left is right about inclusion. You should always include people because you never know who's going to come up with the best idea. It could be the gay guy and the Jew, right? And Socrates and Jesus had a lot of seriously important things in common. First, like you in this time, they both lived in a time where the smartest, most sophisticated people believed there was no such thing as truth, that moral truth was relative. You know, you may remember if you read the Bible, Pontius Pilate says to Jesus, "What is truth?" Obviously a very sardonic question. And both Socrates and Jesus believed there was such a thing as truth, but you couldn't put it into words. You couldn't quite say what it was. So they both found a technique to move people to the truth. Socrates, who came first, would go out into the square and he would hunt down young people, because young people are the most certain of what they believe, right? Because they know the least, so they're the most certain. And Socrates would ask them questions. He would hammer them with questions until they started to think like, maybe I'm not so close to the truth as I thought I was. And Jesus, of course, spoke in parables and did miracles. And he said, I am the truth. I embody the truth, which is a very profound concept. And another thing they had in common is they were both murdered by the government. Largely, you would have to say, for hate speech. And this is one of the reasons conservatives don't like hate speech, right? Because you might be killing Socrates and Jesus, right? They were both killed for blasphemy, for saying things that were just beyond the pale, just could not be tolerated. And the third thing they had in common was that after they were murdered by the government, they took over the Western world. Now, Socrates took over the Western world because Socrates had a student named Plato, and Plato has a student named Aristotle. And Aristotle had a student, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to quiz you, but I just want to know, does anybody know who Aristotle's student was? Like you're a history, okay, you know, good. Yes, so happy that someone knew that, yes. Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great conquered a huge swath of the world and brought with him what was called Hellenic culture, Greek culture, that he had learned from Aristotle, who had learned it from Plato, who had learned it from Socrates. And this became the Hellenic world. And Rome then conquered the Hellenic world and adopted Greek philosophy and Greek thought. The saying at the time was, Rome conquered Greece, and then Greece conquered Rome. And of course, Rome then became Christian. And Rome conquered the Western world, and it became the Roman Catholic Church, which brought the thought of Aristotle and Socrates and Plato and Jesus and St. Paul, brought them together into this one church. Usually people think it's Thomas Aquinas who brought them together, but there are a lot of writers. Aquinas was the most important one. And the church formed, everyone here formed Western civilization. It was like the birthplace of Western civilization as we know it today. You know, conservatives get angry at leftists because it always seems to us that leftists go very easy on Islamic people when they do stuff wrong, but very hard on Christians when they do stuff that they don't like. So their country, I think it's 11 countries where homosexuality is still illegal in the Islamic world. And sometimes you can get killed. You can get killed for being gay. You can get hanged, thrown off a building for being gay. And it seems to conservatives, lefties never say anything about this. They never say a word. But if Mike Pence, God forbid, Mike Pence says, homosexuality, I don't think that's right. It's like, Mike Pence is Satan. I hate Mike Pence. And the reason is the same reason that your friends can say things to you that your parents can't say. It's exactly the same reason. Well, if you're a girl and you get dressed and your roommate says to you, that top, it's a little revealing, why don't you put on a sweater? You put on a sweater, you say, okay. But if your mom says to you, are you going out in that? It's like, Mom, you're slut-shaming me. Same thing with the church. Christianity is us. Whether we believe, whether we have ever adopted it, whether we've ever even thought about it, it formed this society. And Christianity is essentially the thought of Jesus, St. Paul, Aristotle, and all the others put together. So here's what Aristotle, through all his teachers, had to say. And this is the most complicated philosophy in human history. I'm going to give it to you in 2 minutes, so it's not going to be exact. But Aristotle tried to figure out what was best for human beings. I don't know if have you ever seen Conan the Barbarian? Where they say, what is best for human beings? And Arnold Schwarzenegger says, to crush your enemies and listen to the lamentations of their women. Well, Aristotle tried to think, what is best for human beings? And he had what I think was a brilliant thought. He thought, if you do something for another reason that can't be the best thing because you're doing it up the scale. You're doing it to get up the scale. So money can't be the best thing because you have money to get stuff. And stuff can't be the best thing because you usually have stuff for what it does for you. But Aristotle found one thing that you have for itself that he thought was the point and purpose of human life and the best things for human beings, and he called it eudaimonia, which is a Greek word which is usually translated as happiness. And you can hear, it really means good spirits. You can hear the word daemon in there, like demon. Eudaimonia is translated as happiness. This was the thing that people wanted. But eudaimonia is not happiness the way we think of happiness, like that yellow smiley face, because the yellow smiley face comes and goes. Like bad things happen to you all the time, all of us. And you're not happy when bad things happen. A friend dies or something like that, you're going to be sad, right? But eudaimonia is different than that. And Jesus had a description that I think is the right description. A lot of Christians think that Jesus is the highest value. I have a friend who's a pastor, runs the Daily Wire, and he says, the purpose of Jesus is Jesus. What does Jesus give you? He gives you Jesus. But Jesus didn't say that. Jesus said, I've come so that you might have life in abundance. I'm not preaching to you. I'm just telling you where the thought comes from. And life in abundance is really what eudaimonia is. And when I describe it, I call it joy, and the way I describe it is if you're watching a movie and something sad happens, you weep, the heroine dies, whatever, you sob and sob, and then you come out and say, great movie. That was a great movie. When you can live life like that, that's eudaimonia. Then you have eudaimonia. So how do you find it? And this is, the person who listens to what I say next is going to be the happiest person in about 20 years, okay? 20 years from now. It takes a long time to find eudaimonia because nobody's going to believe what I say. But the thing is, and this is an insight from Christianity, an insight from St. Paul, is you begin to find eudaimonia by realizing that you kind of suck, right? The Bible says no one is righteous, no, not one. You kind of suck. And what does it mean, you kind of suck? Well, you kind of suck because you pretend you're brave, but you're really scared out of your wits. You pretend you're honest, but really every one of you knows that in some way your life is a lie, and you're putting on a show for people. And you pretend you care about people, and sometimes you care about people, but a lot of times, not so much. And because you're not what you know in your heart you're supposed to be, you're constantly terrified that people are going to find out what you really are. And I offer you this experiment. Listen to your friends. Listen to how much of what they say is trying to convince you of what a good person they are. Incredible, incredible number of words, actions go into people just trying to show that they have virtue when they know they don't. And it makes you unhappy. You know, this is another one of my issues with the left. The left is always telling people that they're unhappy because of injustice. This injustice here, and this person's mistreating you there, and that person's mistreating you there. And that kind of thinking makes you weak because you're dependent on other people to change in order to find happiness. Once you realize that you're unhappy because you suck, then it's in your control, and you can start to find happiness. How do you do it? How do you pursue happiness? Well, because the problem is that you're not righteous, you pursue virtue, what the Greeks called arete. It means excellence, okay? And you can pursue virtue both in the moral sphere, and you can pursue it in the professional sphere. You can pursue it all the time, every day. And when you turn yourself toward virtue in your life, you continue to suck because you're a human being, but you actually start to have eudaimonia. It takes a while, but it happens. Just to give you an example of how this works, right? Let's say you're faithful to your spouse. But you can be faithful to your spouse for all kinds of reasons. You can be faithful because you're afraid of getting caught. You can be faithful because you're afraid you're not that good with women or whatever. You know, you can be faithful because your wife's father is a mobster and he says, if you ever cheat on my daughter, I'm going to blow your kneecaps off, right? But after a while, when you learn what fidelity is for, and I can speak with authority on this because I have one of the great marriages in human history, absolutely true. I've been married for 40 years. We've had one argument 30 years ago. When you find what fidelity is for, you find that it gives you integrity. It means you are who you say you are. And it means people start to react to you as if you are who you say you are. They can count on you. They can love you and know you're going to be there. And you start to have joy in your fidelity. Virtue, said Aristotle, and again, I'm kind of condensing it all, Virtue is choosing the good because you love the good. It's choosing to do the good because you love the good, and you love the good because you know what the good is for. This is why, for instance, I'm not a Catholic. Again, I'm not preaching to you, but this is why, for instance, the Catholics, they talk about sex. I know, I'm sorry, but I'm just not. This is what, when the Catholics talk about sex, they say you should never have sex unless you're married, you should be married to someone of the opposite sex, and you shouldn't use birth control. And by the way, I know some Catholics who do this, they say it's terrific. They have like 6 kids, but it's terrific. But the thing is, why do they say that? Oh, they say it because they're evil, you know, pent-up, horrible people who hate gays. No, they say it because they're studying virtue, and they believe that sex was made for something, which is to have children, to create children. Children should have a mother and father, so you should be married. And so you shouldn't use birth control because you should never do anything that thwarts the purpose. Now, there are arguments against this, really good arguments, but in order to argue with somebody, you need to understand why they're saying what they're saying. And this is what they're doing. They're trying to find Aristotelian virtue in sex so that your sex life will give you joy, it will give you happiness in the Aristotelian sense. Now, in order to have this virtue, in order to choose the good, because you love the good, because you know what the good is for, you need some tools. You need to be alive, right? And you need to have liberty. Now, you don't need to have liberty if you're willing to die like Socrates and Jesus. But that's not as much fun as it sounds, you know? In order to choose the good, you need to be free to choose the good. And this is why conservatives say they don't want the government forcing them to do something even if they know that thing is right. They don't want you to force them to do something even if they know it's right. If you woke up every morning and I was standing over you with a gun and I told you what choices to make, what decisions to make, what attitudes to have, what thoughts to have, and I was always right, I still would have taken away from you your happiness. I would have taken away from you the most important thing you have, which is the ability to choose the good because you love the good. So if you're following this argument, and this is the argument of Western civilization, I'm not making this up, this is what it is. If you're following this argument, you understand that there's a problem with it, right? The problem is, if you can choose the good, you can choose the bad. So our founding fathers, Jefferson and the rest, tried to construct a government, a machine, that would allow people to be free, but would not force them to do even what they knew was right, even what the founders knew was right. So they created tensions between branches of government. They created stopgaps to keep the government from having the power to do what human beings have done throughout history, which is force people to do what they thought was right, what the elite, what the powerful, what the wise and the good thought was right. The founding fathers created this machine. When you look at these machines on television, I know our government is filled with jackasses, but the machine was built so that jackasses couldn't ruin your life by forcing you to do even what was right. And again, the problem is, if you can choose to do what's right, you can choose to do what's wrong. You can choose to say things that are disgusting. You can choose to have attitudes that make you stink. You can choose to do all those things. And all of our founders said that our Constitution was built for a religious and a moral people. Well, why did they say that? It wasn't because they wanted religion to scare people, oh, if you do this, you'll go to hell. It's because religions are essentially think tanks for figuring out virtue, and they give you a context. Now, they may be wrong. There are all these different religions, and you have to kind of, work out which one is right. And obviously, there's wiggle room, but still, that was why the founders wanted people to be religious, and it's why they protected religion from the government. The government could not tell the religious what to do. It's all about your happiness. And, one of the things that drives me nuts about conservatives is when they talk about the pursuit of happiness, they don't talk about this. They talk about building a business or, having a career or living in the woods, whatever they think will make you happy. But those things will only make you happy when things are going well, because when things go badly, you will lose that eudaimonia, but not if you're seeking virtue. So I'm going to try and keep this as short as possible because I actually want to hear from you and hear your reactions to what I'm saying. But the thing about the right, the idea that you have the God-given right to life, which you need, liberty, which you need, to pursue what everyone wants, which is happiness. This is the single best political idea that anyone has ever had, and no one will ever have a better one. And this is the problem with people coming along and saying, oh yeah, the world has this problem, I've got a new system. Why is this the best idea, and why will you never find a better one? I mean, sometimes when you reach the peak, there's nowhere to go but down. Why do I say there'll never be a better idea than this? Because either you have the right to life, or you don't. And either we all have the right to life, or no one does. Because the argument that I should have it, but you shouldn't, it's not a winner, you know? You're going to have a hard time selling that argument to people. That's the argument the Pharaoh sold to the servants. Either you have the right to liberty, or you don't. And if you have the right to liberty, I have the right to liberty. That's why there'll never be a better idea than this. And either you have the right to pursue happiness, or you don't. And you know, people are different in a million ways. They're different in a million ways. But we're not different in this. There's only one thing. The philosophers were right about this. There's only one thing that will make you happy, and it is what I'm talking about, even though it's a very complicated subject. And it's hard to find out what virtue is and what you think virtue is, and it's hard to train your heart to love it, because the human body wants to do other things. But, you know, when I hear people talk about identity politics, and I hear them say, well, my identity is that I'm black, or my identity is that I'm female, or my identity is that I'm gay, I think, like, God love you, you know? I'm an old man. Nothing you do is going to make me less or more happy, okay? I don't care how you live. I don't care what you believe. I don't care what you do with your lives. I mean, I can tell you, if you ask me, that some things are going to make you miserable, but the key thing is, the key word there is you. They're going to make you miserable. They're not going to make me miserable. So I don't care, right? But I'm just telling you, that's not your identity. You know, obviously, if you're a woman or a man, that's part of your identity. If you're black and white, it's, you know, all of our races, we all come from somewhere, it's part of your identity. But your identity is that you are a child of this idea. This idea is your inheritance. Nobody else inherited it from any place else but here. Everybody who has this idea got it from here. You lucky dogs, were born here, and it was given to you. And I don't care if it's Barack Obama or Donald Trump. If you let them take this away from you, you will never get it back. And you will never, the world will have 1,000 years before anyone thinks of it again. So that's my speech, and I would love to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Klavan. I would like to open the floor to questions now. I'm going to correct myself. We're going to do questions on the right-hand side of the room, so your left-hand side, just so that the camera can see everybody. Please do keep your questions under a minute, and if the speaker indicates, you're allowed to respond, but please keep your questions under a minute. Thank you.
Don't tell me I silenced everybody. I think we want you to come over here and say the mic.
Can you all hear me? Hi. In the spirit of disagreeing just a little bit, I'm curious what your thoughts are on American exceptionalism, because I am on the left, and I think a lot of what you say makes sense. But I often get frustrated when I hear America is so exceptional, we are number one, because it seems to derail that whole starting point that you start with, which you got to realize first that you kind of suck before you can actually, in 20 years, get better. So what would your response be to someone who says America's number one, there's no point in saying anything different?
Well, my response would be it's absurd. First, American exceptionalism doesn't mean that. And this is another thing that makes me nuts, because people say American exceptionalism like it means we're great. It doesn't. It means no one has had this idea before that we're supposed to be that free. You know, we're always hearing, well, in Europe they do this, in Europe they do that. Europe had kings for 2,000 years and did nothing but kill each other. You know, I mean, it was great culture, beautiful paintings, but still, you know, we are exceptional because of these ideas. That makes us an exception. We're exceptional because I lived overseas for 7 years. You can move to any other country on earth and you will never belong to that country. Here, 10 minutes after you get off the train, you're an American, and people treat you like an American. I mean, we really do. We really do. Well, look, individuals are individuals, and individuals suck. I mean, that is the truth. But, you know, this is a country that there's never been a place like this before. I mean, take a look. Go online and take a look at, like, Beijing. Take a look at, you know, Riyadh. Take a look at all the other cities in the world. You don't see this mix of people that you see in New York and in San Francisco and the airports of this country. It's amazing. So it's exceptional in that way. Is it the greatest, you know, like, I love it. I love being here.
Me too.
Yeah, you know, I think that it's only exceptional in that way, okay? The rest of it is us. It's people. We do terrible things to one another, all of us. It's not white men doing it to black men. It's all of us. Anybody who gets the chance, anybody who has the power, does it to people without the power, you know? And we're no exception. And what sometimes makes us feel like an exception is that we're so violating our ideals when we do those evil things that it's worse in a way. It's like when there's a scandal in the Catholic Church and, you know, they rape a kid or something. It's worse because they're violating their ideals. So I guess I hope that answers your question. I mean, it is not, exceptionalism does not mean moral superiority. It just doesn't. It means that we have a unique idea.
All right, thank you.
Hello, sir. Thank you for your speech again. In the vein of the last question, I wonder, how do we distinguish between the ideas that you're talking about and some people, most likely, that are going to be on the right, that want to take that and turn that into sort of a worldview that devalues anyone from any other culture? How do you do that? And, like, to the point of even degrading their value as a human life?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously that is a problem on the right. You know, it really is. And I think one of the things that is awful for all sides, that each idea becomes an umbrella for bad guys. You know, I mean, if I were a racist, I'd probably be on the right. It would probably be easier to be on the right. If I were a communist, and communists have killed more people in the last, like, 100 years than anybody ever before, you know, I would be on the left. You know, so these ideas can be an umbrella for bad things. And what I would say is simply that if what's unique about us is an idea, if that's what's unique about us, we are what is called a creedal country, which also makes us unique, also makes us exceptional, then the entire concept that we are defined by our race is un-American. I mean, it is, because what we are saying is, this is it. This is what you buy into when you buy into America. That's it. That's the price of admission. It's not that big. It's not that big. I mean, it's everything, of course. It's like the mustard seed. It's everything, but it's not that big. So to me, you know, I'm also a Christian, and to me, racism is both un-American and un-Christian, and that people do terrible things in the name of those philosophies is just because people suck. It always comes back. It always comes back. That's one of the great insights of human life. Does that answer the question?
Pretty much, yeah. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Hi. So as you said, people suck, right? And it took thousands of years to get to a government that exists to protect the pursuit of happiness. But as we've seen in a lot of other cultures, like Egypt, right? People buy into the idea that there's only one person that deserves this stuff, right? There's people underneath that have to support the government in that kind of government. Right. Exactly. So for those governments to exist, so what do you think the capability of places where they don't buy into this place, like some places in the Muslim world, or even some places around here where they don't, where the people where this would most be benefiting don't agree with it? What do you think the capability is, since it took thousands of years to get here? What do you think the capability of those areas that don't have that baseline is to get to where we are today?
Great question. Great question. And a lot of people disagree with this. George Will, who's an old voice of conservatism, says he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe that Muslims can discover democracy and freedom. I think that's absurd. It's like saying because the electric light bulb was discovered here, no one else can use it. I mean, it's the whole problem. It's all about ideas. It's not about anything else. It's all about ideas. Once you've discovered freedom, like discovering fire, I can show you how to make fire. You know, once you discover a light bulb, once you invent it, anybody can use it. There are questions that I have about Islam, and I'm not I've read the Quran, but I don't know that much about it. You know, it's hard to know about a religion if you're not inside it, really. I have concerns about the Quran. There are two. I have two concerns about it. Three, I should say three. Well, one concern is that, as I understand it, there's no such thing as a secular government under Islam. That is a serious problem because it doesn't leave people free to pursue happiness and discover virtue, and they won't get to where they need to get. Two is that, unlike the Bible, which can be translated, the Quran is the literal word of God. So the actual words that are there are the words, which makes it a little harder to liberalize. So there's stuff in the Bible that was, you know, meant for its time. It was meant for its moment. And we can say, well, now we read this in a different way. Now we see it a different way. We're meant to grow. We're meant to learn. You know, God knows that, you know. And so I worry about that. And the third thing I worry about is what I see with my eyes, that the Muslim majority countries are so unequal, and they treat women in a way that I just don't think, that I think is really difficult. Those are my concerns. Here's the hopeful side of this. A young Muslim today, even in one of the conservative Muslim countries, has the attitudes, according to surveys, has the attitudes of a European in the 1960s, okay? That's pretty liberal. That wasn't true 30 years ago. The world is becoming a much, much better place. And we're playing a big role in that. Democracy and capitalism are two of the best things that ever happened. Hunger has been cut in half in the last 30 years. Poverty has been cut in half in the last 30 years around the world because of capitalism, because of property rights. Democracy makes people happy. It gives people a chance to become happy. And so Muslims are liberating. They're people, right? And religions must be interpreted because, you know, God means us to keep moving and keep thinking. So I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful. And, you know, I've known Islamic people who are great and some who are not so great, and I can say that about every kind of person that I've ever met. And so I'm hopeful, but I have concerns. That's as honest an answer as I can give it.
Thank you.
Hi. So you said earlier that Jesus brought like moral relevance to everything, and I'm just wondering, like, do you think that like people are born evil? I mean,
No, I don't. I think people are. You can look at it. I think people are broken. I think people are broken. The human system is broken, and you know, you can believe it's because Adam ate the apple. I think that's mythology that tells us something very truthful. You know, St. Paul said he wants to do the right thing, but he keeps doing the wrong thing. Of whom is that not true? It's true of all of us, right? We want to do the right thing, but damn it, we had a couple of drinks and, you know, it didn't work out. People are not evil, but they are things that militate against their happiness and their decency. They're tribal, right? I mean, racism is just a subset of tribalism. We're all tribal. We all believe it's very hard for us to step out of our, you know, our race, our home country, and say, no, we're all Americans. It's hard for us to do that. We can do it, but it's hard. It's hard for us to stay faithful in love to one another. It's hard for us to be honest with one another. Those are the things that I think make our lives really tough. It's hard for us to be brave when something is really on the line. It's really easy to be brave when you're pretending to be brave, but there are no consequences, like Hollywood stars when they get up and they make some big speech because they know they're still going to get hired and they're still going to win awards and they're still going to make millions of dollars. That's easy. But when something is really on the line, like you might get thrown out of school or you might lose your job or you might lose your life, it's hard to be brave. So I don't think we're evil. I think we have a terrible capacity to do what's wrong. And there's a difference between those two things. Because I've met, you know, I was a newspaper man. I've met guys who would shoot you in the head just for laughs, you know. They're evil. I don't think most people are like that.
thank you, thank you.
Hi, I'd like to clarify about eudaimonia and whether or not you believe everyone has the ability to achieve that in the United States.
That's almost a medical question. In theory, yes. In theory, I believe everybody has the ability to achieve that. Now, I think there are people who are naturally happier than other people. and are naturally going to feel. There are people who feel more. I mean, this is scientists have said this, and I assume it's true. You've met people who are dour, you know, they're kind of down in the dumps, and people who are just up and happy all the time. So I believe there are different capacities for feeling things. But yes, I believe whatever your best life is, you can have. That's what I believe.
And as a follow-up to that, do you believe that the laws in America protect people equally? That those laws allow people to achieve that full happiness? Because I believe that people are not equally protected under the law in the United States.
Really?
Because, officers who aren't prosecuted for the murder of young black men, or the ability to murder transgender people because it made someone else uncomfortable, and those people are not prosecuted. How can someone feel safe if these laws aren't protecting them?
Okay, that's a big question, and let me see if I can take it one step at a time. First, we live in a country of 300 million people. It's huge. It's a continent, right? Bad stuff happens. Bad stuff happens. 300 million people, you're going to get some bad stuff. There's something called familiarity bias. I can't remember the exact words, but the things that are in front of you are the things that you think are happening all the time. Very few young black men get shot by the police. Very few. I mean, in a country of 300 million people, one is too many if he's innocent, obviously, but still. And second, there have been 3 independent studies that show that cops do not use violence more readily against black people. So you see this on TV, and it's terrible, but you think it's happening more than it is. The fact is that life in America it's not quite fair yet, but it's gotten so much it's fairer than it was, that it's getting really, really close. Things are getting really much better. There is not, I mean, I don't know what you were referring to as that you can kill a transgender person. I'm not sure what state has that law.
It's not a law necessarily that allows it. It's the people who overlook those kinds of things. Transgender people go missing all the time. 2,000 people in the last year who are transgender were murdered. And this is a crisis that goes unaddressed.
And you know this to be the case, that they were murdered and it was not prosecuted because they were transgender?
Because they're not respected by the people in the country. In America, they don't have the ability to have a good life in the United States because the law is not adequately protecting them.
Yeah.
Because the laws that we have still allow these kinds of crimes to occur against minorities.
Yeah, see, I have to challenge you on this. It is possible that unjust people, there are 300 million, there's going to be a lot of unjust people. It is possible that unjust people allow these crimes to occur. But there's no law that allows these crimes to occur. And the important thing about that is, when I was a kid, there were laws that allowed things like this to occur. You know? I mean, and that really is a difference. So yes, there are unjust people in the world, but the fact is, I got to tell you something. Like, you guys are going to live longer than any generation who's ever lived before. You're probably going to colonize the moon and Mars. The last thing you have to worry about in this country, seriously, is racism. I know they sell it to you like a big time, and I know that people are racist and there's bad stuff that happens. But just numerically, like I said, it's not as big as it is in our imaginations. And take a look at the numbers. Take a look at what is actually happening versus the wall-to-wall coverage that everything that supports that agenda gets. So look, these things are atrocities you're talking about, but there is nothing in America that permits these atrocities, and countries have existed and exist this very day where they do permit them. This isn't one of them. I mean, there's no law anywhere that says, oh, go ahead, kill a transit, go ahead, I mean, let me tell you one quick anecdote, right? I was on a book tour. I was in San Francisco. I was in a cab, Gay Pride Day, right? Traffic stopped, okay? Just parade all over the place. The driver got annoyed, right? And he kind of felt me out to feel whatever I was, and he realized I was a conservative, and so he felt free to say to me, he said, it's really ridiculous that these people define themselves by their sexuality. And I said, yes, that is ridiculous, but I'm old enough to remember when you could be, that a cop could go into a gay bar and you would try and pick him up and the cop could arrest you. And the driver said, arrest you? For what? He had no concept of where this came from. He had no, in other words, he was so far, improvement, progress erases its footsteps, okay? When you progress, you still think things are bad. They're not that bad. They really aren't. And things, you know, I just do not think that going by the numbers, that a black man walking down the street, driving a car, is in serious danger, any more than I'm in serious danger of being killed by an Islamist. Almost never happens. It's like you'd be hit by lightning. The same thing for this. So I guess what I'm saying to you is, yes, are there injustices? Yes. Should you pursue them? Yes. But is this an unjust country right now? Not really. It's not really, I don't think.
For time's sake, this will have to be your final follow-up.
Okay, I don't think that you nor I really have the ability to comment on racism because we don't have to deal with it as something in our daily lives. So you may never get pulled over because of the color of your skin, but I know a lot of people who could. And their experience is what I'm referencing, that they don't necessarily, that cop doesn't necessarily need a reason, or he won't be necessarily persecute, like a man or a woman who is of color can be persecuted in this country in a certain way under the law, by cops, by other people, because, I'm sorry, I've completely lost my thought.
Well, sorry, the only thing I would challenge you on there is so often, so many political arguments, people start telling you you can't comment on this. And I think you can comment on anything. And I'm not comparing my experiences, which are my experiences, with other people's experiences, but experiences can be wrong, right? Your inner experience of something can be incorrect. That's, in fact, I would say the key trick of human life is aligning your inner experiences with reality. So I understand if I watch TV and I were a black guy, I think I would feel unsafe, but numerically, you're not. That's my point. I mean, you are unsafe in certain cities, Chicago, Baltimore, St. Louis, you know, you're unsafe. But here you're not.
Hi, Andrew. I just want to ask you two quick questions. First, is it ironic to you that a professor here at HWS who openly praises communism is at this moment holding a counter event called free speech, when communism, all things considered, punishes those for speaking out against the status quo? And then my second question is, as I've been seeing all throughout campus, people have written the word Nazi on the flyers showing your face. So is this ironic to you considering you were raised as an Orthodox Jew?
I wasn't raised as an Orthodox Jew. That's pushing it, but you know, it is funny. It is funny when people like me. I'm going to answer your second question first because I want to go back to the first one. It is funny when people like me are accused of things like being, you know, called fascist or Nazi or something like that. When we're sitting here talking about more freedom, more liberty, more you do what you want. I mean, I guess I just feel like nobody ever went to the dictionary under F and looked up what fascism means or what it looks like. Because we have it so good in this country, and we do have it, you know, relatively speaking, we have it really good. Little things get us crazy, you know, and we start to hurl these epithets at one another, and it really becomes absurd. The things we say about one another, you know, are just silly because they make us feel big and heroic, and we're in some kind of big fight, and we're not. You know, it's like it's just a lot easier to be here than it is to be a lot of other places. So, is it ironic? Yeah, you know, I mean, I always laugh when I hear people talk about microaggressions. Because first of all, I feel that when somebody teaches you to react to microaggressions, they're teaching you to be weak, you know? Because I deal with this stuff all the time. People call me these things all the time. What would it be like if I got traumatized every time somebody called me a Nazi? I mean, I'd never get out of bed, you know? And I think that it's just part of being free is being tough. Part of being free is being tough, you know? If you're going to be free, you got to have a thick hide. You got to be able to take the heat because free people say stupid stuff to one another. Now tell me the subtitle of that communist guy again.
It was actually called Free Speech and an Open Forum. So,
Free speech and open forum. Yeah. The problem with communism is very simple, okay? I mean, communism sounds so good. See, that's the funny thing. You can walk down the street with a T-shirt with Che Guevara, a mass murdering scum, on your T-shirt, and nobody will say a word to you. Try walking down the street with like Hitler. I mean, but communism wiped out more people than Hitler did. And murdered people in China, between China and Russia. It did. Why? Because people, if they're free, you can't both be free and equal. I can't be LeBron James. The only way that I can play LeBron James on a basketball court is if you take stuff away from him, because there's not a damn thing in this world you can do to bring me up to his level, right? So once you want people to be equal, you've got to use force. You've got to force LeBron not to put the ball in the basket. And once you start to do that, of course, you're oppressing them. That's the first thing. The second thing, of course, is we're people. We need a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to do things. The capitalist system, the reason it works so great is because it gives you incentive to beat me out in a free, open, but competitive way. And it doesn't mean there can't be limits on capitalism, but socialism, I mean, we just saw in Venezuela, Sean Penn, punching Hugo Chavez, what a great guy. He's bringing socialism to Venezuela. Now they're eating cats in the street. I mean, this is a country where breakfast grows on the trees, and they're eating cats. I mean, not even dogs. Dogs might be good, but cats, So I don't know what the guy is talking about. I think if he had lived, if he read any history, if he read any truth at all, he would realize that this is ridiculous. I was just telling Katrina I was talking about Bernie Sanders, that he honeymooned in the Soviet Union, a slave state, a state that enslaved most of Eastern Europe. To me, you want to talk about a culture I don't respect? That's a culture I don't respect.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I'm a big fan of yours. I'm a big fan of the Daily Wire. I like a lot of what you guys do. My question has to do with America being a melting pot, and you hear people say, typically on the left, that America is not a melting pot, it's a salad bowl. And to me, I've never really understand that analogy, because a salad bowl, you eat it all together anyways, and it still tastes good. So I think there needs to be a better analogy, but the concept is basically that, the tomatoes stay over here, the lettuce stays over here, no one actually like blends and comes together like a melting pot would. Which to me, I think that what makes America so unique is that you come together and become American. But there seems to be a lot of pushback on that, and just saying that we're not appreciating people's cultures or people's heritage. So to what extent should becoming American also validate another person's culture without making that culture the law in America?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's really interesting. I saw this movie. Did anybody see Get Out? Good. I really like that film, And I was thinking back to an older movie called The Godfather, which The Godfather, the Sicilians come in and they run the mob, but they want to get into American culture. And at the end of the movie, the son says to the father says to the son, I wanted you to be a senator. I didn't want you to be a mobster. I wanted you to become an American. And he says, well, we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. And that was the goal. In Get Out, the idea is you hang out with white people. If you're a black person, you hang out with white people. They steal your essence, And I just thought that was interesting. I thought it made a good movie. But I thought philosophically, I disagree with it. I think that the melting pot was right. E pluribus unum, that make one out of many. I think that is the right idea, because what we are talking about is when we talk about America, we're not talking about a plot of ground. We're talking about an idea. And you subscribe to that idea, that creed, and you're an American. And look at America. Look at what happened to America when it was a melting pot, when we thought of it as a melting pot. Would anybody say that Irish culture hasn't transformed America, or Italian culture hasn't contributed to America, or Jewish culture? All the people who came in and are coming in now, that they won't transform America by melting in, by including. It doesn't work like Get Out. I mean, Get Out is good because it's a horror movie, so it's your worst nightmare. But it doesn't work like that. If you join in, if you assimilate, you get something, and the culture gets something from you. And I think that's the only system that works. I don't think you can do it any other way. People have been doing the salad bowl thing for the rest of history, for all the rest of history, and they have been killing each other over their cultures all that time. We had one civil war here, and it was done. And we had a civil war because we weren't living by our ideals. And so we were torn apart between practice and idea. That's what happened in the Civil War. But since then, Europe you know, had all these different states. Each person had his culture. It was a salad bowl. They did nothing but kill each other, you know, where America has been internally very peaceful.
Thank you.
Hey, so I just had a quick point. So you argued a bit against sort of the use of identity politics within like our current political climate. And I'll agree in the sense that like I see us as all being the same. I think I read recently that like you can find more genetic variation within 60 different South African chimpanzees than the entire human race, right? So we're all the same. Like I get that. And so, you know, I'll agree with you to that extent. But statistics indicate, for example, and I apologize for speaking on a group that I'm not a part of, but for example, right, like the African American community has not seen the same financial income, for example, as the white community. And we also both know, I'm assuming you've seen the same statistics saying that you need to have an income of roughly $70,000 per year to achieve like a certain sort of baseline plateau of happiness or whatever. So I just don't understand how you can argue against not gender politics, but identity politics, given the fact that there are very specific groups of people based on their race, based on their religion, based on the color of their skin, that are repressed within our current country.
Okay. First, I don't believe they are repressed in our current country. What they're experiencing is the effect of bad deeds in history. I mean, this country, you know, I don't know if this country was any worse, any more racist. I mean, when I lived overseas, I was shocked. I mean, this country is the least racist country now that I've ever been in. But I remember what that was like. And there's no question that has an effect. The theory behind what you're saying, okay, is that you can fix the past, and that you fix the past by counterbalancing the past. So in other words, you say, well, you know, white people were miserable to black people, and they were. You know, we all agree, right? That's part of the sad history of this country. Every country has sad history. That's part of ours. So now you're going to bend the line back by essentially what? Taking things from people who never did anything to anybody, white people today, and giving it to people who did not suffer those things, even though they're suffering the historical effect. And what I believe and what I know to be true is that every injustice goes on one side of the scale. And it doesn't matter if you mean it to be a good injustice to fix things or it's a bad injustice to begin things. Every injustice goes on that side of the scale. The only way to get rid of this, one of the judges, I think it was Antonin Scalia, said the only way to get rid of racial prejudice is to stop, you know.
Right. Am I allowed to respond?
Yeah.
But I don't think you're pretty much just arguing, right, by having this colorblind society where we're just going to say, like, oh, things will even out naturally. It's sort of blind to the fact that, like, it's harder to be successful if you grow up poor. Yeah. You're just pretty much saying, like, you acknowledge the fact that we have this problem, but you're saying, like, oh, just let it balance out, even though it won't.
It's hard. It is really harder to grow up successful if you're poor. It's incredibly hard if you have no father, which is really one of the big problems we have in the society, like is fatherless poor. There's a thing called the sequence. The sequence is this. Go to high school. Don't get married until you're 21, I think. Don't have children until you're married. And you won't be poor. The odds of your being poor if you do those things. And look, every person, every group who came to this country went through this. Are the blacks unique? Yes, they are. They have a unique story, a unique history. But that cloud has passed away. There's not one thing. Let me put it to you this way. This is, I guess, my major point. There's not one thing that anybody in this room will ever not be able to do because of racism. There's not one thing. There's not one thing where they will be stopped by racism.
This will be a final follow-up.
Okay, I mean, so you acknowledge the fact, right, that certain groups are oppressed, right, financially?
No, I don't. I acknowledge the fact that people were oppressed and that it can have an effect in the present.
So are you arguing that the African American community right now does not see a lesser financial income than the white community?
No, I wouldn't say that. I said that there is an effect.
You're statistically correct.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I said that there is an effect of the historical injustice, and part of that is economic. Yeah.
Okay, right, yeah, so you acknowledge that's there.
Yeah.
And I get the fact that, like, you're arguing, you seem to be going back and forth between arguing, like, oh, they should pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, right, which was sort of what you were saying by saying, like, oh, you should just follow this line of, like, get a high school education, don't get married. But then that still doesn't address the statistics that it's harder to get out of these systems of poverty unless there is some sort of systematic change. You haven't proposed any sort of fix to this. You're just acknowledging the fact that there's a problem.
Well, but except that every other group has done it when the time came and the racism passed. Every other group has done it. And you know, you're not actually being when you say this to people, you're not actually helping them, are you? I mean, the rise of black people into the middle class, okay, was faster before 1970 than it is now.
That was because of political change.
But the political change was
in the 60s. I mean,
yes, but the political change was all on your side. It was all. I mean, the Great Society stopped black progress.
But you just said, right, that we now are more equal because of what happened in the 60s, but now you're
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say it was the 60s, it was the 50s.
To the next question, please.
All right, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, but look, it's a difficult conversation. I'm not,
Can
you
you,
know.
would you mind raising? I'm a little tall. Thank you. So we've gone back and forth a lot, at least from what I've listened to so far, between theory and then you say numbers, right? Let's look at the numbers, let's look at the theory. One thing, back to the melting pot thing, that was pretty cool, melting pot salad bowl. One thing I like to look at it as, like, you have your glass of milk, you pour your chocolate syrup in it, and everything's together. It's what it's supposed to be, right? That's a diversity we need. That's a diversity we're looking for. Is it consistent? Is it good? No. No one wants their syrup sitting at the bottom of the cup. You have to mix it through, and when it's consistent through and through, that's when you have your chocolate milk. That's when it's actually good, right? So James Baldwin once said we have a tendency, particularly here in America, to do away with all these issues without liberating ourselves from them, right? So you're saying it's a result of past injustices, the things that are happening now. That's us saying, okay, we're going to abolish all of these things that are bad, just to say we abolished them without actually liberating ourselves with them, which is why we have these issues. And that's a theory, right? So that's a theory. Let's look at the numbers now. 90% of African-American children will stay in the same class or be in a class below their parents. That is the statistic. I can send you the information if you like it, right? And on the reverse side, 90% of their white counterparts will be at that same one for the ones that are in the upper middle class, or will be increasing, right? So if we're going to do away with all of these injustices and without liberating ourselves from them, how in fact is it actually equal?
Well,
how in fact is it actually better?
I'm curious, though, how you can have a statistic about the future.
That's research done over the past 30 years. And that's continuing the same trend.
But how can you say that 90% of people now are going to be in the same class in the future?
Because again, we have a thing of abolishing all of these past injustices, like you said, without liberating ourselves from them. So if this is an issue that you're saying we're suffering from past injustices, that's the only reason why things are not as good as it could be, although we've made so much progress. How much progress have we actually made if we're doing this for, news and press and to say, oh, we're liberal, we're inclusive, we're doing all of these things, when the fact of the matter is, our paths are going to be drastically different simply because we were born from different parents.
Well, first of all, I question whether you can predict the future from this moment. You know how they say if trends continue, trends never continue. So that's always not true. But secondly, look, there is historic dysfunction among the poor. Okay, and they always blame the race that is poor. The British used to blame the Irish, and then the whites blame the blacks in America. Among the poor, there is consistent dysfunction, and the dysfunction has to do with family makeup. Did you read the book Hillbilly Elegy? I mean, that's the hillbilly world. Some of that world is the world that voted for Donald Trump. They have the exact same, the mirror image dysfunction that you get in poor black neighborhoods. That dysfunction can be addressed. That dysfunction can be addressed, but it has to be addressed in ways that sometimes are politically unacceptable. So when you say to people, you need dads, you need to have a dad in your community, that's true in West Virginia, and it's true in Baltimore, and it was true in Ireland, and it's true, it's true in all these places. Have you read Shelby Steele? Shelby Steele, I would say, I think he's the best living black writer of nonfiction anyway. I do. I think I'm a writer, so I just love his.
You got to read some of my stuff.
All right. Well, I love his prose. But he talks about the fact that, fathers aren't always good fathers, but the fathers that were in his community made the community so people like him could become what he is. And that is missing. You know, the black fatherless rate is 72%. That is worse. That is worse than when white men were selling them down the river to break their families apart. That's a problem. It is. It's a word. It is. It is. Look it up. You look it up.
You have time for one more follow-up, if that's all right.
Okay, we're gonna
right.
Since we're gonna go about follow-ups here.
But I mean, I guess my point is this. My point is this.
Can I let
Yes,
you-
I will let you speak in just a second. But just to make my point, it's just that the dysfunction is connected to poverty. I do not believe it's connected to race.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're going to take 2 more questions. We have time for 2 more questions.
Hi there. So I was actually at the free speech thing for the first 20 minutes that was referenced earlier, and within 5 minutes it had escalated from free speech to race issues. And one of the things that was brought up was that today people of color are living in kind of, the shadow of the oppression that they experienced long ago, and they're still experiencing its effects even if the actual the oppressive laws aren't in place. And so I was kind of wondering, I think that's true. I think despite the fact that I can't point to a law that says, black people are at this disadvantage or should be at this disadvantage, I think that racism carries on an individual level because, as you said, people suck. And I think that because of the situation that happened, before 1860s, a lot of black people started, or a lot of black families started at a lower level. And so I was just wondering, I think that's all objectively true. Do you agree with that? And if so, how do we rectify that? Because if the United States is about equal opportunity, that's not equal opportunity.
Right. No, I do agree with it. This is what I'm telling you. I do agree with it. What I think that I'm telling you is history is tragic in this regard. It's tragic in twice, right? One, it's tragic because you really can't fix the past. You can't, all you can do is stop what you were doing and let the generations take care of it. That's all you can do. No one's ever done anything else, okay? And the other thing that's tragic about it is I'm saying this, who doesn't have to suffer it, okay? And that's tragic because it takes the authority out of my voice, even though what I'm saying is true, okay? So yes, this is a tragic fact. All kinds of things should be done for the poor in this country. I think they will be done. Like I said, poverty has been cut in the world in half in 30 years, which is just an amazing stat. So I think it's going to happen. But I think it's going to be painful. And what I really do believe is when we're talking, I believe this in every subject. When we're talking about race, we're always talking about the wrong thing. Whether it's Jews, whether it's Irish, it's all about ideas and policies. And I think that everything that you do in America should be done for everybody. So that's why I say the problem is with how do we address poverty, which is always a good question, not how do we address black poverty, even though they are suffering from specific acts in the past.
A quick follow-up to that is, I do actually think that this is more of a specifically black problem in the United States because they were at even more of a disadvantage than, the Chinese, the Irish, the Italians that came into our country.
Not than the Irish.
Well, actually, they're because the Irish, the Chinese, they were come here and they were basically servants, like indentured servants. They had jobs and they were making money, but they had no rights and weren't able to do anything with that. And so to come off of that. And this is opinion now. My opinion is that that's easier to, in a sense, grow off of than black people who were brought here as slaves, who were, white people were basically told for generations that these people are less than you, treat them such. And I think that's a much harder thing to recover from. And so do you think that...
You should check the history of the Irish in this country because even blacks were writing at the time, well, at least we're not the Irish. The Irish came here with nothing. They were despised. The signs really did say no Irish need apply, basically, So, look, this is stuff that has happened. And you can argue that, color gave them a leg up. But I really do think it is, in the end, it's culture and ideas. It's interesting. In Russia, where the Jews were so mistreated, the Jews were a criminal class. Now, nobody would look at America and say the Jews are a criminal class. That's just not something you'd say about American Jews, And so the way people are treated in the moment is what makes them who they are. The minute you stop treating them like that, they stop being like that. And I think that that's the answer. That's the only, the problem is it's the only answer. If I could fix it some other way, I would, And that's what I notice is when you try to fix it some other way, you only extend the injustice into the next generation.
We're going to move to our final question. Thanks.
Good evening, Drew. So earlier you touched on these, the chances of our American ideas, the ideas of the Greeks and Christ and our founding fathers, and the chances of those ideas spreading around the world to other cultures. Do we as Americans, well, first of all, what should we as Americans do to aid that spread along? And do we have a responsibility to do anything like that, or do we have a responsibility not to do anything like that? Keeping in mind, past failures.
Our failures, again, are overrated. There's more democracies in the world right now, I believe, than there's ever been, but there are an awful lot. Remember, when America started, there were none. We were it, I mean, there was Britain, which had a constitutional monarchy, but this was it. And now, even people who are not republics have to pretend they are. Like, remember, the Soviet Union was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. You could only elect one guy, but that was it. They were the republic. East Germany was called the Democratic State of East Germany or something like that. They had to pretend because now we know it works. Now we know it's a good thing. So, hell yes, we should sell it. But I mean, you don't. Like, I believe in the imperialism of ideas, not the imperialism of guns. You don't sell it by going into your country and saying, now you're going to be Democrat. Hi, we're here. Now you're going to be democratic. Rome is over. But sure, you sell it. You sell it by showing them how great it is. That's one of the reasons I hate the fact that every movie is anti-American. I mean, in the old movies, we used to examine our problems, but America was a good thing overall. I think we should sell the hell out of democracy and capitalism because it works. It works. It makes people happier. It makes them richer, which also makes them happier. So yeah, I do think that's our responsibility. How can it not be?
Thank you.
This concludes our program for this evening. If you could join me in thanking Mr. Klavan.
Thanks very much. And thank you for a civil conversation. I love hearing the other side of these things because otherwise I'm just sitting there talking to myself. So thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.